Let's move on, right?
There we are. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining our educational webinar this evening. And we're in for, again, hopefully a very good session tonight, discussing HMO conversions, particularly mixed use HMO conversions. So those who don't happen to know me, David Johnstone, I am the CEO of Leo Crowdfunding. We're a property crowdfunding platform. And my co-host tonight, delighted to be joined once again by the owner and founder of Property Fortress, Mr. John Corey. Good evening, John. You're on the royal wave tonight rather than the hello.
Well, I figured I'd get more formal. It's the evening.
Yeah. So how we work tonight is we do always like to have questions from the audience, but we use the Q&A function on Zoom and not the chat box. So please use the Q&A. You can fire any questions you have up there. Depending on what the question actually is, we may hold it over to the end, or if it's specifically relevant to answer there and then, we may try and answer. Sometimes you can get bogged down in questions and then the webinar runs on too long. So we'll just make that judgment. But if you do ask a question and we haven't answered it, don't panic. It's not that we haven't seen it. We've just made a judgment call to answer at the end. So for those who don't know Leo Crowdfunding, as I said, we are a property crowdfunding platform. This is our homepage on the website. And I always like just to point out that we are an appointed representative of a company called Share Unlimited, who are authorized and regulated by the FCA. So I'm actually an approved person. You'll see my name on the FCA register if you care to look. So the webinar tonight, if you like, is under the compliant umbrella, and we'll take care that we don't cross any boundaries as we have our discussions tonight. So education is a big part of our DNA, and we run these periodically, and you're going to see more of these running as we have our YouTube channel up and running. If you haven't already, please go to our YouTube channel, just type in Leo Crowdfunding, subscribe, of course. We're on a drive to get to 100. That gives us more flexibility and what we can and can't do with our channel. So we're going to start very soon doing these webinars at the same time live on YouTube and also on Facebook. That's what we're moving towards. So education, big part of our DNA. Our name of Leo Crowdfunding was born out of learn, earn, own. And that's really what our mission statement is there, to help investors learn while they earn how to own property assets by leveraging the power of the crowd. So education is key. And tonight, John, we're talking about HMOs. So when did you first come across this British term of HMO? And what was your first sort of recollection of this part of the property market?
So I was here in the UK, I think either in Chester or London, when the legislation passed that actually defined HMO, because prior there wasn't a real definition and there were very few rules and regulations. And for health and safety reasons and a variety of things, they tightened it up by defining what HMOs are, how they need to operate, things like that, because they're not quite the same as single lets. So that, I don't know how long ago that was, but it's certainly while I was here.
I won't ask you your age, don't worry. We'll just say it was just soon after you arrived, and we'll leave it at that, I suppose.
No. Actually, it was fairly recent. I mean, I want to say this is only like 15 years, maybe 10, 15 years. There are some people who would have been operating prior and then had to deal with the transition. Most people who have HMOs probably never knew what the old rules were.
Yeah, I know in the mid-'80s, there was definitely a definition. So maybe that's what I think quickly I'm doing my maths, but there's definitely something in the mid-'80s. I think it was the initial definition, and then periodically since there's been changes in definition and tightening, etc. So one of the reasons, John, we decided to do this tonight, this whole concept of mixed use HMO, on our weekly webinar, this has come up a few times, and certainly I feel, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I certainly feel that there is a real opportunity for mixed use HMOs currently. And I think that's driven by three factors. One of the things I want to highlight to those who have joined us tonight, three reasons why I think if you're interested in getting involved as a fundraiser and as a developer to do your own projects, it's perhaps worth looking at this type of mixed use HMO we're going to discuss tonight. And also, if you're an investor, it may be that you look for these type of projects as part of your diversified portfolio, etc. Now, the three things I've named here, the economic reality of the high street, and that simply is, John, the fact that main high street brands are beginning to disappear. Footfall isn't what it once was. Online shopping, etc., is a big economic change that perhaps 10, 15 years ago we didn't see coming.
Well, just funny enough, the way you highlighted this photo. So I'm looking at the unit to the left, thinking there's probably going to be an easy planning application, get that roof bumped up, given the unit on the right already has it. So there's different ways to think of this, that the shops aren't as valuable as they once were. The unit on the left, you can go up with permitted development. You might be able to go up 2 stories. I don't know what the rules are, but there is something about 2 stories now. Possibly in these, if you use Google Maps and look over the top, how deep are the lots? Can you go back? Can you reduce the size of the retail units? Because the front third is more than 2/3 of the value of a retail unit, or right around that threshold, and the back 2/3 have little to no value. So,
well, if you're into sort of commercial, the commercial environment and what's changing in the high street, a fascinating listen would be Mike Ashley. I think it was about 2 years ago when he was called in front of one of the Commons Select Committees and had to give answers as to, I suppose, Sports Direct had bought, I can't remember, was it Debenhams he bought, or one of the big high street brands, and he had obviously closed some stores and sacked some people, and he was dragged in front of the Commons Select Committee. Fascinating discussion about what's happening with our city centres. I remember remarking, "I'm not Father Christmas," was one of the comments he made, in the sense that the politicians need to wake up, that it's not simply buying a high street brand and make it work. The economics have changed in our city centres, and they've changed forever. And one thing is to start putting some more residential back into those town centres as a means of getting footfall back in those areas.
So he purchased H&M, and he attempted to purchase Debenhams, and has been a bidder in various rounds as Debenhams went through pre-packs and other things. And his point, which is a logical point, is that the marketplace has shifted. I don't know that I'm a buyer of his solution. And his statements were all pre-COVID, when there was a lot less online shopping than there is now. So possibly his ideas wouldn't even fly if you look at the numbers now.
Yeah, but possibly, yeah. But his analysis of where the market was very interesting in terms of high street, which is worth, if you want to spend half an hour and listen to some a relevant discussion on the high street. So moving on quickly, the effect of COVID, obviously I don't want to dwell on that, but it has certainly affected footfall, shops, all the regulations, etc., which means that when this post-COVID, a return to normality, whatever that is, there is more than likely going to be less shops open than there were before COVID. That's just, again, an economic factor. And then you have on top of that, this relaxation of permitted development and Boris's build. So those three things coming together, John, I think means that, there's certainly HMO, mixed use HMO is certainly well worth people's consideration as fundraisers and as developers.
Yeah, we'll touch on this slightly later when we talk about Dan, because Dan has some experience in this area.
Yeah. So to kick us off, John, in terms of HMOs, let's just be really clear, because I'm sure we've got some people on here quite experienced, but may have others on here just complete sort of novices, and this is new to them. So if I say to you, what exactly is an HMO and how do the government define it? How would you explain that?
So I don't know exactly where this reference comes from, but effectively it's 2 or more than 2, I think, is the phrase that some of the legislation uses. So yeah, I would say that's 3 people or more. and they're not from the same family or household, whatever that may mean. And there are some ambiguities about that. And the key to HMOs are they might have their own beds to sleep in, but they're sharing some facilities. So it's not a completely self-contained unit. There's a shared kitchen, bathroom, as it says, something like that. Think of it as house shares, thinking about it as university housing when a bunch of friends rent a big house, things like that. Those would all be HMOs. There used to be a lot of confusion between this idea of an HMO that didn't need a license and an HMO that needs a license. The real important point is they're all HMOs. It's just whether you actually have to have a license. And because they're all HMOs, you have to meet the same fire code regulations for fire doors and things. There's a number of things that are very much common, and you need to understand the nuances. There's slight ambiguity in that councils can choose to interpret this slightly. So best to work with your local council. They'll have someone that handles HMOs, find out what the requirements are. There's the national requirements, but then there's the local interpretation.
Yeah, I think that's key that we'll mention later. There's definitely local stipulations that aren't the same in every council area. So it's very, very important.
There's also some weird ones that the original legislation sort of came off the back of some fire code issues where a number of students were killed in a fire. So if you had a building with 4 flats, all self-contained, they have 1 person a flat, 2 are owner occupied, third one's owner occupied, and the last one's rented. And that third one, the owner decides to rent it, that flips the whole building into being an HMO, even though none of the units are, if the conversion from what it was to these flats happened prior to, I think, 1993. So there is a few corner cases that you have to understand. So even though you don't think of having an HMO, the building could be an HMO and your freeholder could be very concerned about whether you're renting or living in it.
Yeah, okay. So this information on the left came from the gov.uk site. So it is to do with obviously regulations. So people I would channel them to there to read.
Yeah, this specifically is licensing, and there'll be some other pages. The government's pretty good about spelling it all out. You just have to go look for it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's get around these, what I've called the key factors. If you're thinking about HMO, either as a fundraiser project for yourself or indeed investing, I think these are the key things in my book that you want to be looking at and want to be aware of. I suppose like all property, John, it starts off with location, location, location. And I think that's no different when it comes to HMOs. You know, just because somebody tells you it's a great area and there's loads of people looking for rooms, or someone tells you that there's no demand in the area, you have to go and do your homework and you know, maybe try and book some rooms in the area. You know, maybe go and obviously walk the ground, but you certainly have to first of all establish, is there demand in the location you're looking at for this type of property?
Correct, and I would go slightly further that the location is dependent on what you're trying to do. So if you want to run an HMO, you're likely to see that your occupants are less inclined to drive, or they may be more sensitive to public transportation than someone who's a whole family that might have a car or 2. So almost bleeding into the second one type, depending on what you're trying to offer and where you are relative to the town center, to transport or something else, could be a very sensitive topic. 2 or 3 more minutes by foot could change the location dramatically for one type of use, but not the other.
Yeah, and as you say, then getting into the type, again, it's very important to be aware that within the HMOs, there's a wide variety. So we've already talked about, for instance, mixed use, where there's perhaps a commercial premises below, and you're looking at some resi accommodation above. To the other end of the scale, where perhaps you're looking at an old Victorian type building with large rooms that lend itself to rooms being divided off or shared space, etc. So again, you're going to have to look at the type of HMO you want to get into. Is it more the cheap and cheerful, and it's just about getting bodies in, or are you going to aim for sort of professional tenants where you're going to have everyone in the building professional? And I think you are better decide on your type, John, and then obviously looking for tenants for your type, and not the other way around. You have to have a clear focus on what type you're going for.
I mean, from a discrimination point of view, you have to be careful about being overt or too narrow in what you're allowing. At the same time, you have to think about what's the demand going to be. Is it student-led? Is it young professional? Will it be nurses and doctors from the local medical location? Is it software consultants who are working for a big corporate and need a place Monday night through Thursday night? So the type of tenant will affect maybe the desirability, what they define as the commute. It could also be highly sensitive to schedules. I know a person who was renting to a lot of medical staff, and because their schedules were changing all the time, it was highly disruptive because some are coming home and want to do whatever they want to do, and others are like trying to sleep because they're on a funny shift, and it became very sort of challenging because of the fact that there was no alignment of schedules.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So that leads again nicely on to the whole area of tenants. And I think this, for me, and I've had a little bit of experience in HMOs, I wouldn't be an expert by any shape of imagination, but in terms of experience I've had, one of the biggest challenges has to be finding the right tenants, and then keeping the right tenants. So it's all well and good finding your location, deciding on your type, you spend the money, you do the property up, but you have to let the rooms. Any sort of tips, John, or what are the key things when it comes to finding tenants, or have you any experience in terms of what's the best way of finding tenants?
So my personal bias is to avoid HMOs because I don't necessarily enjoy the high touch people management side of it. I've had some HMO in the past, but it was more because couples were sharing a flat. So it's like a 2-bedroom with 4 people. Technically in Southwick it was an HMO, fine. The chemistry matters, and there needs to be some way of sort of addressing chemistry without discrimination, without sort of being overtly into micromanaging people's lives. And the people I've spoken to tend to talk about maybe there's like a house captain or someone who's more or less the person in charge of making sure things are getting done or something. You could look by professional type. It could be students. It could be something else. There's a lot of variables here, and I am definitely not that person for how to do tenant mix. You might want to talk to some folks like Target 5, which is, they've done hundreds of these. I can refer you to other people who deal with different HMOs in different markets, but it's very nuanced. This is something you should embrace because you want to do it, or you should back someone else's deal because you want them to do it.
Yeah, it's where things can go wrong, but at the same time, if you follow the right principles, then more often than not, you will get it right. So I think one choice is a letting agent. Obviously, you can let a letting agent locally do the sourcing of tenants, and they'll do their guarantees and their searches and their references. But then you're going to have to pay out some of your rent to the person who's doing that. So obviously it costs. You've also got Facebook to check up on people, and unfortunately that's just a reality of, I think, even for job interviews now, people will go on and have a look at Facebook, and it's probably a good way of perhaps identifying some that you may not want in your property, or alternatively people may check out to your satisfaction. I think I would just recommend, John, not to rush in. Sometimes the danger is you've done a property up, you've got 3 or 4 rooms, and you're like, okay, I want to get these let as fast as I can. And I've heard so many horror stories of landlords who have rushed in to taking almost the first tenant because they want the rent, and then it's just been difficult. So my advice would be on this: don't panic until you've got the tenants that you think are right, for your property.
So being an American and being sensitive to discrimination when it comes to these things, you have to be careful about being overly specific. And one tip that I do know works, because I've seen it work with my property, is the existing tenants many times will know who they'd be happy to have as a new roommate. And there's an element of they will actually help screen and maybe even supply a list of possible candidates.
Yeah, very much so. Okay, so that's location, type, tenants. quickly then on design, John. So what would be the factors when it comes to design in terms of thought process, either for an investor or a fundraiser?
Well, it is a funny one. There's a guy named Julian Maurice who targets homes that you could only ever get 3 bedrooms out of, unless you were to convert every closet into a bedroom. And what he's targeting is a mix where you have 3 people who want to stay a while. It feels spacious. It feels like a home. Then there was another guy who's no longer doing this because of personal reasons. He would target males who are divorced, that work in the City of London, who want a place close to the train station, but close to where the kids are with the ex-wife. And he said they're downsizing from a big home. So he would take a very large house, 5, 6 rooms, but it could have been 8 or more. And he doesn't do that. He puts in more common space. It's more about having the footballer ready on the skybox and upgrading the rent to people that want the extra services. So again, this is sort of like type where you figure out your audience, you figure out what amenities they want. One of the worst things that can happen for your property is having high turnover. So if you're sort of pushing the rents and you're squeezing everybody into tight spaces, these days people might want a desk to work from when they're at home. They might want to have a little mini fridge in the room so they don't have to go out to the common area all the time. So the design to be looking for retention, the design to be looking for security of, COVID safe, the design to be positive and attractive. So instead of people like, okay, I'm living in a shoebox and it looks cheap and cheerful, but it doesn't feel very good, that wears off and they will move. Where if it's like, no, I like my place and I don't really want to move. So then the landlord's not constantly managing it, and the tenants will try to find a way to make it work because they want to stay.
Yeah, no, very much so. Really good point. And again, the theme of tonight is very much education. We're trying to sort of throw things out to make you think. We don't have all the answers. We're just trying to throw things out that you need to consider if you're looking to get involved in this space, either as a fundraiser or as an investor. And certainly that whole concept around design is so important as to what people actually want from their HMO experience, as opposed to necessarily what's going to maximize every single bit of space for rent. So again, if anyone's any questions or comments or observations, by all means throw them into the Q&A and we can involve that in our discussion. So the next one is regulation. And I've put an extra slide up here, John, just on that, because I think it's a very important part. Again, we haven't time tonight to sort of really peel back the layers of this one. But as I've already indicated, go to the .gov site. There are complexities regarding HMO rules. There's differences in housing planning and council tax definitions, depending on which council area you're in. So please, find out what your local council or the council you're looking to operate under. You've got to understand their rules and what their definitions are. That's very important. And then, of course, you're into whole things with planning commission as well. And there's a whole set of criteria for HMOs and conversions, etc. So is there any kind of summary, John, on regulation and planning that you can throw out there just to kind of wrap that section up?
If you want to make serious money, you need to know what rules apply, and don't assume the council person knows the rules. Assume possibly they don't. Maybe they've been in the department a short time. Maybe they are not up to speed. As an example, if you rent to adults with learning disabilities, my understanding is that doesn't fall under the HMO regulations for C4. So there is this idea that councils can say, in this area, we have too many HMOs, we don't want any more. They bring in a C4 restriction, which lets them manage and effectively stop any more HMOs. Well, if you rent to certain specific types of tenants, the C4 rules don't apply. The council people probably wouldn't volunteer that. They might not even understand it. The same with some other nuances, that there's some real corner cases. I'm not saying you'll necessarily always have those in your area, but you do need to think about it.
Mm-hmm. We could let you spend an hour giving you anecdotal evidence and experience of things that have gone wrong with people who didn't check regulation, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just highlighting that big red flag. Make sure you go out and understand the regulation. Very important. So location, type, tenants, design, regulation. I think above all, John, above all, as it's same probably for all property, the maths have to add up. The figures must work. I think that's absolutely key. I know it's something that you're particularly sort of strong in terms of deal analysis, and particularly for an HMO, there's perhaps a little bit more complication than a simple, buy to let or single apartment. More things you got to be aware of, but I'm sure you'll agree that maths is key.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things about that. So there is a regulation that says the tenants have to have control over their own heating and cooling. So then there are people who want to put in digital devices that control the thermostat, which override what the tenants want. Well, you got to figure out what the regulations allow, and then you need to figure out how economical will this property be to run if the energy consumption's higher, or if you're pushing the rents already and people are moving out, then can you afford the cash flow? A different person chose to drop mini fridges into all the rooms because they'd already built en suites. They were already willing to take the risk that they might get rebanded as A-band properties, regulatory issue. But by putting in mini fridges and the fact that it was already en suites, they're now attracting people who used to be in single lets and now want to downsize for budget reasons, and people who are in HMOs but are worried about the virus spreading, so they want to move into what they can effectively create their own little bubble. So you got to know your numbers, you got to figure out the math. David's highlighted like a 4-room HMO, some very broad brush items. Like I said earlier, with this gentleman that does 3-bedroom places, he can get the rent of a 5-bedroom HMO from 3 bedrooms because he's charging a premium, because he's offering a premium, and he has lower turnover.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So the things I've highlighted there are figures must stack up. You have to take emotion out of the equation. Big mistake, people get emotionally attached to their project, and even it's beginning to go wrong and the maths isn't there, they start making the wrong decisions because they're emotionally attached, or if a friend who lives in the next street, etc., etc. The more due diligence you do, the more accurate your figures will be, and that is key. And as John alluded to there, this is a broad brush rule of thumb. It's not scientific for every single situation, but just as a planning metric, if you had a 4-room HMO, then probably a good planning figure would be your first 2 rooms when they're let will probably pay your mortgage. So you can almost allocate 2 rooms, pays the mortgage. The 3rd room that's let is going to cover your costs, utilities, taxes, gas, etc. And the 4th room then is your profit. So I think one of the reasons I like that as a rule of thumb, if you've got 2 rooms not let at the same time, well, alarm bells should be ringing that you're actually not covering your costs, and that's the key point. Or if you have 1 room not let, well, at least you're covering your costs, but you're not actually making anything. So it's obviously about occupancy levels and voids and all the rest of it. And HMOs has those periods where you're going to have that by definition, because you're dealing with like 4 individual rooms rather than one house. But that I thought was an interesting rule of thumb. By all means, screenshot that or take a quick snap with your camera. But that I think is a very effective analysis, sort of high level analysis on the maths. So in terms of raising funds for HMOs, and this is really where I suppose we're wearing our fundraiser hat. We've got about sort of 7 to 10 minutes left on the webinar. And I think raising funds, there's obviously different sources of funds, John, and people sometimes want to just get one and they're happy with that. Others want to be more aggressive. And the one thing that tends to hinder them is obviously raising the funds to go and purchase. So they might use their own funds. They might be able to get one equity investor into that particular SPV if it's holding the project. That person being passive obviously allows that one investor in. Do you want to just very quickly highlight why that is a very important factor to be aware of in terms of a one passive investor and no more?
So there's a regulatory issue. The UK, it's the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority. If you have more than one passive investor, whether you have them as a loan or not, effectively you're pooling money. and the FCA has rules for pooling. And unless you're authorized by the FCA before you start to run a pooled investment, you can't even talk to people about it. So the crime is the conversation. It is not taking of the money. So if you stick to one passive investor and you don't break any other rules, or there are some others, then okay, fine. You're probably going to fly under the radar legally, not because they didn't notice, but legally.
Okay, thank you. So that rules out multiple investors into sort of one HMO and an SPV. There's of course bank lending, and then of course there is property crowdfunding, and that is a source of funds, a source of alternative finance, if you will, that is becoming more and more popular with fundraisers, and is becoming more and more popular with investors who are looking to invest into HMO type projects through property crowdfunding platforms. And we're going to spend a few minutes now talking about a project that happens with our platform currently. But what I want to do primarily is, as we go through these, is if we go back to this slide.
So what?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say on the bank lending, which it's fine, we can talk about regulations. Lenders do not want you to use buy-to-let finance, buy-to-let mortgages for an HMO. They have HMO products. You're not supposed to use buy-to-let. It technically would be mortgage fraud if you intended to run an HMO, but you didn't put that down in your loan application. So you want to be applying for an HMO loan, declare that up front.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Okay, so I want everyone to kind of hold these key things here: location, type, tenants, design, regulation, maths. So hold those criteria, and then we're going to look at a couple of examples as we wrap up here tonight. And again, any questions, comments, file them into the Q&A for us, so we can answer at the end. So I want to draw your attention to this group. For those who are interested in commercial and mixed use, it's a guy who runs a company called Taylor Capital. Dan Taylor, some may remember he came on and talked about commercial on our webinar a few months ago. This is really his speciality, and he has a club that you can join, and it's a good way if you do want to learn more about this type of thing. I would certainly recommend you get in touch with Taylor Capital. And there's just two case studies. He has a case study on our platform and looking about doing a raise in the near future. But if you look at the two examples that he's been involved in, the one on the left where you've got a couple of shops down below, and then you have the residential up above. So that's a perfect example of mixed use. And then on the right hand side is where originally there was only 2 stories, but once the property was purchased with commercial and residential, they then got planning to put another 2 stories on. Again, a great way of adding value by adding further uppers to the property. So there's lots of opportunity to do this around the country in certain areas, particularly given, as I said at the start, the whole build from bars and permitted development, relaxation, etc., etc. Now, John, in conclusion, what we're going to do is run through the Target 5 project and look at those sort of 6 key areas. Go ahead.
Just so people know, so you can join Taylor Capital, you can be part of the club. It doesn't mean you can do multiple investors in the same deal. You still have all the same warnings from the FCA, whether you're in a club, not in a club, whether you know people or don't know people. Friends and family clubs, none of that causes an exemption. You still have to be FCA authorized.
Okay, there's a question in just there now. In fact, while you're on that FCA, we'll just dig with it. So,
yep.
So can you say...
So a quick question says, does the FCA regulate sourcing or finding deals for other investors? So let's be clear. Sourcing is a euphemistic way of being a real estate agent or an estate agent. It falls under the Estate Agency Act. Therefore, you have to comply with the estate agency rules and regulations. The FCA doesn't get involved with the state agency, so they don't have any say over that end of things. So if you're sourcing deals for other people, as long as you're complying with the State Agency Act, you're largely free from anything the FCA cares about. If you were to try to raise money for a deal where you're offering an investment to people where they bring money and they're going to get a cash return, but they're not going to become owners of the property, or they're going to be pooled owners, then you're back into the FCA territory.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. So let's just go through an example of a mixed-use HMO, which is a tangible example of what we discussed earlier. This is from Target 5, property consultants based down in Brighton. And I'm going to just run through these slides quite quickly just to give you the context, and then we'll dwell on the numbers for a few minutes, John, just sort of to wrap up. So Target 5, this is the project that is actually currently live on our platform. It's actually reached its minimum target, so it's 100% funded. They had set an upper limit of 142,000. It's now currently at 136,538. That was at about an hour ago, so I don't know if anything's happened since then. So for those who are on, who've already invested in this one, this will just give you a reminder of this particular deal. And for those who perhaps haven't or were on the fence, then there's still an opportunity for you to invest if you so wish. So the main figures there are very quickly the gross yield of this building with a commercial premises, 2 apartments, 1 3-bed let out by the room, and a 2-bed apartment. The gross yield of that was 11.7%. The structure of the deal, we'll not go into huge detail now, but that gives an idea of the actual property. And Andy and Tina, very, very experienced people, 350 sort of similar developments Andy's been involved in. Tina on her side with the letting and her background, over 2,000 plus transactions. So 2 very strong property professionals with a strong track record. The building itself is down in Worthing, right on the south coast. It's actually got just about a sea view out of an upstairs bedroom, but it's a couple of hundred meters away from the sea in Worthing in a strongly commercial area, but an area that's been designated by the council for regeneration. So it's one of the reasons why they chose this, and they have a number of other properties in this area. So there's really the figures. What we're looking at there is they bought the property for 245, and the acquisition cost 17 grand. They're going to spend 145k renovating, as I say, the ground floor commercial, a 3-bed apartment and a 2-bed apartment. So the total cost 407, and they expect when they finish the refurb for this to be 550,000 valuation. So just by doing the work, they're creating 142,750. And I think, John, as a starting point, as a project, I mean, that's a pretty good place to be when you finish the refurb, creating that type of value in a mixed-use HMO.
So a few things about this. So the deal was initially agreed early in the year. Then the COVID period kicked in. The sellers are actually overseas, quite a different country. They live overseas. So there was a lot of delay. And during that period, it also, the buyers, Target 5, were able to actually knock the price down. So they're getting what they believe is a BMV, below market value deal. So they're buying it for what they think is a very good price. Then they're adding value, so sweat equity, whatever you want to call it. It's a bit run down. The photo has a lot of peeled paint and other problems. They're going to do a total refurbishment on the interior plus the outside. So they're adding value, they're buying at a discount, and that's how they're creating that projected equity. It's only an estimate, but none of us that do projects have anything more than estimates. We always look to buy smart, and then we look to add value.
Yeah. So in terms of then realizing income and getting the project done, they have bank funding from Lloyds Bank in place. Loan offer agreement was shown to the investors, were able to access that and see it. In terms of structuring the deal, Target 5 we're putting in quite a small amount, if you like, up front themselves, covering any balance, but they also indicated that they would be part of the raise, and they have indeed themselves as individual directors put in some money on the raise itself. So they're kind of willing to back their own project, which is always a really good sign. In terms then of the—
So one second.
Sorry, go ahead.
So in the normal language, I find the deal, you put up the money. They found the deal, they're looking for the crowd to put up the money. But in addition, they've actually come in themselves and put in some of the money that you see in the raise. So part of that money raised is from them. So they have skin in the game, they've found a discounted value, they hope to add value, and they have a long track record. So, you know, you're taking a punt on the future in the sense that no one can predict what the value of a property will be a year from now. And at the same time, if you take a look at the photo on the left, it's a bit of a wreck. You can imagine you can add value if you do it up and change the layout.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what they're spending the money on. And there's just, I'm going to run through a couple of quick slides here to give you a wee bit of context. They're nice mood boards. So they, John, were going very much for the design being a really important part of their strategy. You know, they've thought a lot about the mood of the rooms with the intention of maximizing the rental opportunity. So it's professionals they're after. That's their clear type.
Yeah, they have properties very much either on the same street, the next street over, 2-3 streets over in this area. They know the demographic. They know from, these are some of the photos from some of their other properties. So they know what they're targeting to create with this property.
Okay, so here's the miles on this. Again, we talked about the miles earlier. So again, without going into every single line, you can see there that the annual rental income from the commercial unit, the 2-bed flat, and then the 3 rooms of the 3-bed being let individually is bringing in the 4K per month, projected annual rent 48K. So that's at a gross yield of 11.7%. That's probably the key figure as you look at this from a financial point of view. And that's with the sort of high-end finish and obviously being in a great location. Now, we're not going to go into this tonight in any huge detail. You can go on to the project and download an offer document and have a look at this in more detail. There's also on our YouTube channel, you can see 2 webinars that Andy and Tina joined, myself for one of them and myself and John for the other one. And we talked through, obviously, the financials. Where this is different than most people are perhaps used to is that while this is a 6-year investment overall, the strategy here and the structure is that this property will be refinanced by the end of the first year, and 70% of the initial investors' funds are returned after year 1. There's then a profit share from year 2 to 6, 50% of the profit, and at the end of year 6, the SPV buys back the shares and also has a 10% capital growth over the duration of the project built in. So that's really, if you like, if someone put in £100 to buy a share, they're getting £40 back over the 6 years. But in true metrics, because they're getting so much of their money back after 1 year, then MIRR is the best way, John, of describing that or giving a fair metric.
Well, the point here is after the first year, when they've done the refurb and they've refinanced it, you have approximately £30 left in the deal, and you're going to make £40 of income for £30 of investment. Absolutely.
So an interesting structure, and one that I think is more accurate when you're doing this type of a project. The money back, 70% back in 1 year, is a really interesting angle, because that money then can be taken and reinvested in other property projects. So you're getting the value of the £100 as it works through its 6 years, but you can take 70% of your investment and invest it somewhere else, which is, I think, a tremendous opportunity. So as I say, for anyone who may still be interested in investing, you can go on and get an offer document, which gives you all the information we've talked about. Since the project started, they then were able to add the valuation that was done for the bank, the loan agreement, and this document allows you to really assess the full information. And it's worth reading, again, going back to our 6 criteria. Apply those 6 criteria as you read through the offer document. Even if you're not planning on investing, that's fine. But read the offer document and see how those 6 criteria play out in this example. So that's where it is currently. And This is just showing you how you can download all the documents that are required to view the property. So really just to wrap up on this one of the reasons I thought this was a very interesting proposition was the opportunity to JV with a high yield HMO conversion expert. Very much a hands-off investment, and this opportunity to actually recycle cash, that was certainly the three things that caught my attention regarding this one. So wrapping up, just reminding that this project is actually still open for investment. It actually closes tomorrow at 5 p.m. So it's currently at 136,000 of its 142k maximum target. So it is a success. It's always nice, John, when you're talking about a successful raise, one that's already reached the minimum target. And really it's just the upper limit now has been taken. And it's interesting how some investors have actually invested at the start. And then when they saw it fully funded, they've actually come back in and put a little bit more money in and added to their investment. Like, I suppose now they know it's going to be go forward as a project. And that's always an interesting dynamic. So do you have any comments, John, just to wrap up?
There's a question from Veronica. Yes, the investors in the project as shareholders will be getting regular updates from the team as the project moves along over the 6 years. And I think it's monthly rent will be paid out to each shareholder. So you'll get a distribution of funds on a regular basis, plus the information. Yeah.
And without making a raw debate my own back, I think investors will be very pleased when they see the monthly update, how it's structured and the content and how it's laid out. It's very clear month on month. So what you can do is literally file the updates, and then you can go back and see learning points and follow the project as it goes along. So again, from an educational purpose, the minimum investment into this project is £100. So even as a learning experience, as a means of getting your hands on a shareholder agreement, watching an HMO mixed use from start to finish, and actually been part of it as a shareholder, you actually can do that for £100. So if there is still some available and anyone wants to even avail of that angle, then they can do so obviously after the webinar or before 5 o'clock tomorrow.
It's perfectly fine to put £100 in so you can get access to the shareholder agreements. You can learn as you're going along. There is no shame in owning £100 worth of shares. Yeah, very much so. So that really wraps us up for the evening. Always just again that caveat that when we do make investment pitches, they're not to the general public. You do have to be registered on our platform. You have to be investor ready before you can actually invest in this type of project. So thank you very much for your time tonight. I'll fire this one up just very quickly if anyone wants to take a quick screen grab or take a quick photo of it. But that, John, is HMO from a high level. Do you have any last minute sort of words of wisdom before we wrap up on this very important topic? The biggest thing I'd like people to do is let David know that the email address that he's had on the screen a minute ago. If you have questions, there are topics you want to know about, if you didn't understand something about what we covered tonight and you need us to go deeper, Veronica mentioned more time in the FSA stuff and a separate opportunity to discuss that, that's fine. So, we are very much driven by whatever you want to learn.
Yeah, very much so. So we may well send a bit of a questionnaire out after this one. So we always like feedback. If you found it valuable, by all means, reach out to us and let us know what you thought was good. And if you have any pointers, John and I are more than happy to take pointers from people where they can be improved. But I think tonight you've got some good information and we have laid out all the key points, key things to be aware of, and some key learning aspects for the world of HMO, particularly mixed use HMO. So listen, thank you much for your time. Again, look forward to your feedback. And for the rest of the night, then stay safe and every success on your property journey. Talk to you all soon.